Welcome to today's comprehensive exploration of one of literature's most enigmatic and multi-layered works. Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, published in 1865 by Charles Lutwidge Dodgson under his famous pen name Lewis Carroll, has captivated readers for over a century and a half. What appears on the surface to be a delightful children's fantasy reveals itself upon deeper examination to be a sophisticated work laden with esoteric symbolism, philosophical inquiry, psychological insight, and social commentary that continues to yield new interpretations with each generation of readers. The genesis of this extraordinary tale traces back to a golden afternoon on July 4, 1862, when Carroll, then a mathematics lecturer at Christ Church, Oxford, embarked on a boat trip up the Thames with the three Liddell sisters, Lorena, Alice, and Edith. During this journey, he spontaneously began telling them a story about a little girl named Alice who fell down a rabbit hole into a world of wonder and impossibility. The real Alice Liddell, just 10 years old at the time, was so enchanted by the tale that she begged Carroll to write it down. This innocent request would eventually give birth to one of the most analyzed and interpreted works in English literature, a book that would transcend its origins as an oral entertainment for children to become a cornerstone of literary symbolism and esoteric study. Carroll's background as a mathematician, logician, and photographer profoundly influenced the construction of his narrative. His academic training in formal logic and mathematical principles is evident throughout the work in the form of paradoxes, logical puzzles, and impossible situations that challenge conventional reasoning. His interest in photography, a relatively new art form in the Victorian era, gave him a unique perspective on reality and illusion, themes that permeate every aspect of Alice's journey. The precision with which Carroll constructed his seeming nonsense reveals a mind deeply concerned with the nature of reality, consciousness, and the structures that govern human experience. The story's opening sequence establishes the fundamental tension that drives the entire narrative. Alice sits beside her sister on a riverbank, watching her read a book that contains neither pictures nor conversations. This initial scene represents far more than mere childhood boredom. It symbolizes the soul's dissatisfaction with conventional reality and established knowledge systems. The sister's book, filled with dense text but devoid of imagery or dialogue, represents the dry academic approach to learning that dominated Victorian education. Alice's restlessness in this environment mirrors the spiritual discontent described in mystical traditions worldwide, where the seeker first experiences dissatisfaction with ordinary consciousness before embarking on the path to enlightenment. Esoteric literature, the child archetype holds profound significance as the symbol of the uninitiated soul, pure, unconditioned, and open to transformation. Alice embodies this archetypal child perfectly. She has not yet been fully shaped by society's rigid expectations and limitations, making her the ideal candidate for the initiatory journey that awaits her. Her youth represents not just innocence but potential, the malleable consciousness capable of perceiving realities that adults have trained themselves to ignore or dismiss. The appearance of the White Rabbit marks the story's transition from ordinary reality to the realm of the extraordinary. This seemingly simple character carries layers of symbolic meaning that connect to various esoteric and mythological traditions. In many cultures, rabbits symbolize fertility, renewal, and the cyclical nature of existence. They are associated with lunar deities and the feminine principle of creation and regeneration. The rabbit's white color adds another dimension to its symbolism, representing purity, spiritual illumination, and the blank slate of consciousness ready for transformation. The White Rabbit's most distinctive characteristics, his formal dress and obsessive concern with time, introduce crucial themes that permeate the entire narrative. His vest and pocket watch mark him as a creature of civilization, yet his animal nature suggests something wild and untamed beneath the surface. This duality reflects the tension between natural instinct and social conditioning that characterizes much of human experience. His frantic repetition of oh dear, I shall be late," establishes time as a central concern of the story, but not time as a natural phenomenon, rather time as a social construct that creates anxiety and controls behavior. In mythological terms, the white rabbit functions as what Carl Jung termed a psychopomp, a guide who leads souls between different states of consciousness or realms of existence. This role appears across cultures in figures like Hermes in Greek mythology, who guided souls to the underworld, Anubis in Egyptian tradition, who conducted the dead through the afterlife, and Virgil in Dante's Divine Comedy, who led the poet through hell and purgatory. The white rabbit serves this same function for Alice, leading her from the world of ordinary consciousness into the realm of the unconscious, where the rules of logic and causality no longer apply. Alice's decision to follow the white rabbit down. The whole represents the crucial moment of commitment that begins every initiatory journey. In esoteric traditions, this moment is often described as the point of no return, where the seeker must abandon the safety of the known world to pursue truth in unknown territories. Alice's unhesitating pursuit of the rabbit demonstrates the courage and curiosity necessary for spiritual development, qualities that distinguish the potential initiate from those who remain content with conventional understanding. The rabbit whole itself deserves extensive analysis as one of literature's most potent symbols of transformation. Alice's fall is not merely physical, but represents a complete dissolution of ordinary consciousness. As she tumbles through space, passing floating objects and losing all sense of direction, she experiences what mystics throughout history have described as the dissolution of the ego. This descent echoes numerous mythological and religious traditions that describe the necessary journey into darkness before enlightenment can occur. In Greek mythology, Persephone's abduction to the underworld represents a similar descent into the realm of the unconscious, where she must confront death and transformation before returning to the surface world with new wisdom. Dante's journey through hell in the Divine Comedy follows the same pattern, as does the catabasis or descent journey found in the mystery religions of ancient Greece and Rome. In alchemical tradition, this phase is known as the nigredo, or blackening, where the prima materia must be broken down and dissolved before it can be reformed into the philosopher's stone. The objects Alice observes during her fall, maps, pictures, bookshelves, and various household items, represent the fragments of ordinary consciousness floating free from their usual contexts. This imagery suggests the dissolution of normal categorical thinking, where objects lose their fixed meanings and associations. In psychological terms, this mirrors the process of regression that must occur before new integration can take place. The orderly world of adult logic gives way to the fluid associative thinking characteristic of childhood and dream states. Upon landing in the Hall of Locked Doors, Alice encounters one of the story's most significant symbolic complexes. The circular hall with its many locked doors represents the liminal state between consciousness and unconsciousness, between the known and unknown worlds. In esoteric traditions, this intermediate space is often described as the threshold where the initiate must prove their worthiness before gaining access to hidden knowledge. The fact that most doors remain locked suggests that spiritual development requires not just curiosity, but the proper keys, wisdom, understanding, and inner development. The golden key Alice discovers introduces the ancient symbol of spiritual access and hidden knowledge. Gold in alchemical tradition represents the perfected state of consciousness, the philosopher's stone that transforms base metals into precious ones. Keys symbolize the power to unlock mysteries, to gain access to forbidden or hidden realms. The key's small size suggests that spiritual truth, while immensely valuable, often appears insignificant to those who have not developed the perception to recognize its worth. The Drink Me potion. Alice finds represents one of the most universal elements in initiatory traditions, the consumption of consciousness-altering substances to facilitate spiritual transformation. From the soma described in ancient Vedic texts to the kykeon consumed in the Eleusinian mysteries, from the wine of Christian communion to the ayahuasca of Amazonian shamanism, sacred substances have long been used to alter consciousness and provide access to non-ordinary states of awareness. Alice's hesitation before drinking reflects the natural caution that arises when confronting the unknown, but her eventual decision demonstrates the trust and surrender necessary for spiritual development. The changes in Alice's size that follow her consumption of the potion carry profound psychological and spiritual significance. In esoteric traditions, alterations in the perception of the body often accompany shifts in consciousness. The dissolution and reformation of physical boundaries represents the ego's loss of its fixed identity and its expansion into new modes of being. Alice's distress at these changes reflects the natural resistance of the ego to transformation, its desire to maintain familiar boundaries and limitations. From a psychological perspective, Alice's size changes can be interpreted as representations of the fluid nature of self-perception, particularly in childhood. Children often experience themselves as larger or smaller than they actually are, depending on their emotional state and environment. Carroll's amplification of this natural phenomenon into fantastical extremes captures something essential about the subjective nature of identity and self-image. The pool of tears that Alice creates while in her enlarged state represents another classical symbol of purification and emotional release. Tears, in many traditions, are seen as cleansing agents that wash away impurities and prepare the soul for renewal. The fact that Alice nearly drowns in her own tears suggests the overwhelming nature of emotional catharsis, where the very process of purification threatens to destroy the individual undergoing it. Alice's encounter with the mouse in the pool introduces the theme of communication across different forms of consciousness. The mouse's dry historical recitation, the driest thing it knows, fails to dry the wet creatures, suggesting that mere intellectual knowledge, no matter how extensive, cannot address emotional or spiritual needs. This episode foreshadows the many communication failures Alice will experience throughout her journey, where characters speak past each other rather than truly connecting. The Caucus race, where everyone runs in circles and everyone wins prizes, presents a brilliant satire of empty activity and meaningless achievement. In the context of the story's deeper symbolism, it represents the futile nature of ego-driven competition and the circular thinking that keeps individuals trapped in repetitive patterns. The race has no clear beginning or end, no defined course, and no actual competition, much like many of the activities that occupy human attention in ordinary consciousness. Alice's next significant encounter occurs with the blue caterpillar, one of the story's most explicitly mystical characters. Seated atop a mushroom and smoking a hookah, the caterpillar embodies the archetype of the spiritual teacher or guru found in many esoteric traditions. His blue color connects him to various spiritual symbolisms. Blue is associated with the throat, chakra in Hindu tradition, representing communication and higher truth. It is the color of Krishna in Hindu mythology and of the Virgin Mary in Christian iconography, suggesting divine wisdom and compassion. The caterpillar's fundamental question to Alice, "Who are you?" strikes at the heart of all spiritual inquiry. This question appears in various forms throughout the world's wisdom traditions. The oracle at Delphi's inscription, "Know thyself," expresses the same imperative, as does the Zen koan, "What is your original face before your mother and father were born?" The caterpillar's question forces Alice to confront the instability of her identity, her inability to define herself in terms that remain constant through changing circumstances. The caterpillar's impending transformation into a butterfly adds another layer to his symbolic significance. As a creature literally in the process of metamorphosis, he embodies the potential for radical transformation that exists within all conscious beings. His matter-of-fact attitude toward this coming change suggests the acceptance and equanimity that characterize advanced spiritual development. He neither clings to his current form nor anxiously anticipates his future state, but exists fully in the present moment while remaining open to transformation. The mushroom the caterpillar offers, Alice represents another consciousness-altering substance, but one that grants her control over her own size and, symbolically, her own perception and power. The fact that one side of the mushroom makes her larger, while the other makes her smaller, suggests the dual nature of spiritual development, where growth in one area often requires diminishment in another. The seeker must sometimes become smaller, more humble, less ego-driven, in order to become larger in spiritual terms. Alice's encounter with the Duchess and her violent household presents a disturbing picture of authority run amok. The Duchess's casual brutality toward her baby, her cook's excessive use of pepper, and the general atmosphere of chaos and violence represent the shadow side of domestic authority. In the context of Victorian society, this scene can be read as a critique of harsh child-rearing practices and the arbitrary nature of parental power. On a deeper level, it represents the oppressive aspects of conventional authority that the spiritual seeker must learn to recognize and transcend. The transformation of the Duchess's baby into a pig carries multiple layers of meaning. On one level, it suggests that beings raised in violent, chaotic environments may become brutalized themselves. On another, it reflects the alchemical principle that transformation can move in either direction, toward refinement or toward degradation. The baby's transformation into a pig also echoes various mythological traditions where humans are transformed into animals as punishment or as a result of their own base nature being revealed. Alice's encounter with the Cheshire Cat introduces one of the story's most philosophically complex characters. The cat's ability to appear and disappear at will, leaving only his grin behind, presents a profound meditation on the nature of identity and existence. His famous declaration that "we're all mad here" suggests that in a world built on illusion and arbitrary conventions, conventional sanity becomes a form of madness, while what appears as madness may actually represent a clearer perception of reality. The Cheshire Cat's persistent grin, which remains even when his body has vanished, represents the enduring nature of consciousness beyond physical form. This concept aligns with various philosophical and spiritual traditions that view consciousness as fundamental and matter as secondary or illusory. The grin without the cat presents a powerful image of the Cartesian problem of mind and body, suggesting that mental phenomena may exist independently of their physical substrates. The cat's direction giving to Alice that one path leads to the Mad Hatter while the other leads to the March Hare, both of whom are mad, suggests that in the realm of the unconscious, all paths lead to forms of madness or non-rational consciousness. This is not presented as a problem to be solved, but as a reality to be accepted. The cat's casual attitude toward madness reflects the wisdom that in the deeper realms of consciousness, ordinary categories of sanity and insanity lose their meaning. The Mad Hatter's Tea Party represents one of the story's most psychologically and symbolically rich episodes. The scene's central conceit, that it is always 6 o'clock, always tea time, creates an atmosphere of temporal suspension that reflects various mystical concepts about the nature of time and eternity. In many spiritual traditions, enlightenment is described as entry into an eternal present moment, free from the anxieties of past and future. However, Carroll's presentation of this concept is deliberately ambiguous, leaving unclear whether the Hatter's temporal imprisonment represents transcendence or entrapment. The Mad Hatter himself embodies the archetype of the wise fool found throughout world literature and mythology. His madness, historically linked to mercury poisoning from hat-making processes, symbolizes the price often paid for forbidden knowledge or for seeing too clearly into the nature of reality. In many traditions, those who achieve the highest levels of spiritual insight appear mad to ordinary society because they operate according to principles that transcend conventional logic and social norms. The March Hare, as the Hatter's companion, in madness, represents the cyclical nature of time and consciousness. Hares and rabbits have long been associated with lunar cycles and seasonal changes, and the March Hare specifically connects to the mating season when these animals exhibit particularly frenzied behavior. His perpetual state of madness suggests a consciousness trapped in the cycles of natural instinct and biological imperatives. The dormouse, sleeping through most of the tea party, but occasionally rousing to tell fragmented stories, represents the unconscious mind that surfaces periodically with symbolic communications before retreating back into dormancy. His stories, while seemingly nonsensical, contain symbolic elements that reflect the deeper patterns operating in Alice's journey. The fact that the Hatter and March Hare use him as a cushion suggests the casual disregard with which consciousness often treats the messages of the unconscious. The riddle, "Why is a raven like a writing desk?" which the Hatter poses but cannot answer, has become one of the most famous unsolved riddles in literature. Some scholars suggest that the riddle's very unsolvability is its point, that it represents the kind of meaningless intellectual puzzle that distracts consciousness from more important spiritual work. Others have proposed various solutions, but Carroll himself insisted that the riddle had no answer, suggesting that it functions as a kind of Zen koan designed to frustrate rational thinking and open consciousness to non-rational forms of understanding. The Tea Party's atmosphere of repetitive circular conversation reflects the way consciousness can become trapped in repetitive patterns of thought and behavior. The Hatter's explanation that he and time have quarreled, resulting in his temporal imprisonment, suggests that attempts to control or manipulate time lead to a kind of spiritual paralysis. The only way to escape temporal anxiety is to surrender to the natural flow of existence, rather than trying to dominate or direct it. Alice's departure from the Tea Party marks her growing awareness that the characters she encounters are trapped in their own limitations and cannot provide the answers she seeks. This realization represents an important stage in spiritual development, where the seeker begins to understand that external teachers and authorities can only point the way. Ultimate understanding must come from within. The Queen of Hearts' Garden represents the culmination of Alice's encounters with arbitrary authority. The scene where gardeners frantically paint white roses red because they planted the wrong color introduces the theme of reality manipulation to avoid punishment. This episode serves as a powerful metaphor for the ways in which truth is often distorted or hidden to appease those in power. The gardeners' terror at their mistake and their desperate attempt to cover it up reflects the climate of fear that characterizes totalitarian systems. The roses themselves carry rich symbolic significance. In many esoteric traditions, the rose represents the human soul in various stages of development. White roses traditionally symbolize purity and innocence, while red roses represent passion and experience. The violent transformation of white roses to red suggests the forced corruption of innocence, the imposition of experience before its natural time. In the context of Alice's journey, this scene represents her growing awareness of how power systems manipulate reality to maintain control. The Queen of Hearts herself embodies the archetype of the terrible mother or tyrannical authority figure, found in many mythological traditions. Her constant threat of execution, "off with their heads," reveals the death-based foundation of her power. However, the fact that these executions are rarely carried out suggests that her authority rests more on fear than on actual ability to harm. This realization becomes crucial for Alice's eventual liberation from the Queen's power. The Queen's appearance as a playing card connects her to the realm of games and chance, suggesting that her authority, while seemingly absolute, is ultimately arbitrary and subject to the whims of fate. Playing cards represent the element of randomness in human affairs, the recognition that much of what appears to be ordered and controlled is actually subject to forces beyond human comprehension or direction. The croquet game that follows Alice's entrance into the garden presents one of literature's most brilliant metaphors for the manipulation of systems to ensure predetermined outcomes. The use of living creatures as equipment, flamingos as mallets and hedgehogs as balls, creates a game where the tools have their own agendas and cannot be completely controlled. This setup reflects the inherent instability of systems that attempt to use conscious beings as mere instruments of power. The flamingos, traditionally symbols of elegance and artificial beauty, represent the aristocratic class that serves as the instrument of royal power. However, their tendency to look up and question rather than simply striking the ball suggests that even the privileged classes maintain some independence of thought and action. The hedgehogs, representing the common people, demonstrate their own forms of resistance by curling up into balls or running away when struck, refusing to cooperate fully with the game's requirements. The constantly changing rules of the croquet game reflect the arbitrary nature of systems designed to maintain power rather than achieve justice or fairness. The Queen's ability to declare victory at any moment, regardless of the actual state of play, demonstrates how authoritarian systems maintain their legitimacy through the simple assertion of their own rightness rather than through adherence to consistent principles. Alice's growing confidence during the croquet game represents her developing ability to see through the illusions of power. Unlike the other players who cower before the Queen's threats, Alice begins to recognize that the Queen's authority rests on collective agreement rather than inherent legitimacy. This recognition prepares her for the final confrontation that will liberate her from Wonderland's constraints. The appearance of the Cheshire Cat's head during the croquet game creates a crisis that reveals the fundamental absurdity of the Queen's system. The question of whether a head without a body can be beheaded exposes the logical contradictions inherent in arbitrary authority. The King's suggestion that anything with a head can be beheaded, while the Queen insists that anything that can be beheaded must have a body, creates an impasse that no amount of royal decree can resolve. The trial scene that concludes Alice's adventures in Wonderland presents the ultimate test of her spiritual development. Accused of a crime that is never clearly defined, confronted with evidence that makes no logical sense, and subjected to legal procedures that violate every principle of justice, Alice faces the full force of systematic oppression designed to break the individual spirit and enforce conformity. The Knave of Hearts, accused of stealing tarts, represents the scapegoat figure found in many mythological and psychological systems. His crime appears trivial, but it serves as the pretext for demonstrating the system's power to punish anyone for any reason. The tarts themselves, sweet confections that bring pleasure, symbolize the simple joys and freedoms that authoritarian systems seek to control and regulate. The trial's procedures, with their mixture of legal formality and complete arbitrariness, create a Kafkaesque atmosphere where the appearance of justice masks its complete absence. The jury box, filled with animals who can neither read nor write, suggests the way democratic institutions can be populated with individuals who lack the knowledge or independence necessary to perform their functions effectively. The poem presented as evidence against the knave demonstrates how language itself can be manipulated to support predetermined conclusions. The verses, which actually say nothing incriminating, are interpreted by the king as proof of guilt through a process of creative misreading that ignores the text's actual content. This episode reflects Carroll's deep concern with the relationship between language and meaning, a theme that would become central to later philosophical and literary movements. Alice's final moment of awakening comes when she recognizes the fundamental unreality of the entire system that has been oppressing her. Her declaration, "You're nothing but a pack of cards," represents the moment of enlightenment when the spiritual seeker sees through the illusions that have kept them trapped. This recognition doesn't require struggle or conflict. The simple act of seeing clearly causes the entire construct to collapse. The metaphor of the pack of cards is particularly apt because it captures both the arbitrary nature of the system and its fundamental fragility. Playing cards, while they can be arranged in elaborate constructions, are ultimately flimsy and temporary. They derive their power only from the agreement of players to treat them as meaningful within the context of a game. Once someone refuses to play, the cards lose all their authority and become mere pieces of paper. Alice's awakening and return to ordinary consciousness raises profound questions about the nature of reality and the relationship between different states of awareness. The story's circular structure, ending where it began with Alice by the riverside, suggests the cyclical nature of consciousness and the ongoing relationship between ordinary and non-ordinary states of awareness. The question of whether Alice has truly awakened or simply moved from one dream to another reflects genuine philosophical concerns that have occupied thinkers for millennia. Buddhist philosophy speaks of ordinary waking consciousness as a form of dream from which we must awaken to achieve enlightenment. Hindu philosophy describes multiple levels of reality, each more fundamental than the last. Western philosophy has long grappled with the problem of distinguishing between appearance and reality, between subjective experience and objective truth. Alice's final state of consciousness represents not a return to ignorance, but an integration of the insights gained during her journey. She has experienced the dissolution of ordinary categories, confronted arbitrary authority, and learned to trust her own perception over external validation. These lessons, while gained in the fantastical realm of Wonderland, apply directly to the challenges of living consciously in ordinary reality. The story's enduring popularity and continuing relevance stem from its ability to speak to universal human experiences while remaining open to multiple interpretations. Each generation of readers discovers new meanings within its pages, finding reflections of their own concerns and insights. In the 1960s, the book was embraced by the counterculture movement as an allegory of consciousness expansion and resistance to authority. Later readers have found in it anticipations of developments in psychology, quantum physics, and consciousness. Studies. Contemporary scholars have examined Alice's adventures in Wonderland through numerous critical lenses. Feminist critics have noted how Alice's journey represents a young girl's navigation of patriarchal power structures and her eventual assertion of her own authority. Post-colonial critics have examined the story's relationship to British imperial attitudes and the construction of otherness. Psychoanalytic critics have found in it rich material for exploring the relationship between conscious and unconscious processes. The mathematical and logical elements in the story reflect Carroll's professional background, but also serve deeper, symbolic functions. The puzzles, paradoxes, and impossible situations throughout Wonderland create an atmosphere of cognitive dissonance that mirrors the confusion experienced during genuine spiritual or psychological transformation. By presenting situations that cannot be resolved through ordinary logic, Carroll forces readers to develop new modes of understanding. The story's influence on later literature and culture has been immense. Authors from James Joyce to Gabriel Garcia Marquez have acknowledged their debt to Carroll's innovations in narrative technique and symbolic construction. The concept of going down the rabbit hole has entered common usage as a metaphor for entering into complex, disorienting situations or states of consciousness. In the field of psychology, Alice's journey has been used as a model for understanding various therapeutic processes. The story's structure, beginning with dissatisfaction, proceeding through disorientation and challenge, and culminating in new understanding, mirrors many therapeutic approaches designed to help individuals break free from limiting patterns and achieve greater self-knowledge. Modern interpretations of the work have also explored its relevance to contemporary concerns about reality manipulation, social control, and the nature of truth in an age of information overload. The Queen of Hearts' arbitrary authority and the constant distortion of logic throughout Wonderland seem remarkably prescient of contemporary concerns about authoritarianism and the manipulation of truth for political purposes. The story's exploration of identity and selfhood continues to resonate in an era when traditional concepts of fixed identity are being challenged and redefined. Alice's fluid sense of self, her ability to change size and shape while maintaining her essential core, offers a model for understanding identity as process rather than fixed state. Perhaps most significantly, Alice's adventures in Wonderland serves as a mirror for readers' own relationship with reality and authority. The story challenges us to examine our own assumptions about what is real, what is possible, and what sources of authority we accept without question. Alice's journey from passive acceptance to active questioning provides a template for anyone seeking to live more consciously and authentically. The rabbit hole, in all its symbolic richness, remains perpetually available to those with the curiosity and courage to explore it. Whether we interpret Alice's adventure as spiritual initiation, psychological development, social awakening, or simply as entertainment, the fundamental invitation remains the same: to question our assumptions, challenge arbitrary authority, and remain open to the possibility that reality is far more mysterious and malleable than we typically assume. In conclusion, Alice's adventures in Wonderland stands as one of literature's most successful attempts to encode profound, spiritual, and psychological insights within an accessible narrative framework. Its continuing ability to generate new interpretations and insights suggests that Carroll succeeded in creating something approaching what the alchemists called the Philosopher's Stone, a work that transforms everyone who encounters it, revealing new facets of meaning with each engagement. The story reminds us that the path to wisdom often leads through apparent nonsense, that authority is often arbitrary, and that the courage to question and see clearly is the beginning of all genuine freedom and understanding.